Hey guys, Dave Keller here with Market Misbehavior. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe. I released a video earlier this week talking about Bitcoin and focusing on what I call the choose your own adventure approach. 4 different scenarios. We talked about what Bitcoin could do, some 4 potential future paths over the next 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. Talked about what those scenarios may look like and ask you to vote on which one you thought was most likely or most probable and why. Today, I'm going to follow up to that video and share with you which one I think is going to play out and why. So here we'll talk about what's next for Bitcoin. So earlier this week, I released a video called Choose Your Own Adventure, What's Next for Bitcoin. We focused on the price of Bitcoin, how it's evolved, how it's rotated from more of a downtrend to a bit of an uptrend, and had just broken above 42,000. The question, obviously, logically, is what's next? So we talked about a choose your own adventure style 4 scenario approach. 4 different scenarios, the ultra bullish, ultra bearish, and 2 in the middle. Talk about what the technical implications of each would be. So what we're going to do today is actually focus on those 4 scenarios. We'll talk about them. And again, if you haven't watched those, hit pause, go somewhere else, watch that other video first, because then this one will make a lot more sense. Because here I'm following up with that discussion by sharing you which of these scenarios I find is most probable and why. So we'll look at those 4 scenarios very briefly. I'll show you the chart of Bitcoin and how I think of the evolution of the trend, what I think might be next, and how to prepare for that from a technical perspective. Let's get to the chart. All right, so the video that we recorded earlier in the week, this was the chart that I shared with you during the course of the video, and basically had 4 scenarios. You can see by the squiggly line approach that I'm employing here, this is a fairly unscientific illustration of the trends, and it's more to generally, sort of draw the general theme of how I think those trends could evolve. But in blue, we have choice number 1, which was the bullish scenario, basically taking Bitcoin back up to all-time highs around 65,000 or a little higher would certainly be part of scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 was we remain above 42,000, which is the recent breakout level, but we don't really get above, say, 52,000, 54,000 maybe. And we sort of have a new range-bound scenario up above 42. The third scenario is this is a false breakout. We've broken above 42, but we come back into the range there, and we sort of continue to revolve around 30 to 42,000. Scenario 4 is sort of the ultra bearish scenario, which is not only do we come back, it's a failed breakout, we sort of come down, and instead of just testing 30,000, we actually break below it and head down to sort of the low to mid 20s. That would be sort of a bearish scenario. So those were the 4 scenarios. So which of them did you vote for? Again, if you haven't done it yet, I'd go back to the other video, put a vote in, and tell me which of those 4 you think is most probable and why over the next 4 to 6 weeks in general is what I'm thinking here. Which of these scenarios do I think is most probable? Well, I have to remind you, all 4 of these are possible, and really the essence of this exercise with the last video and this video is not to tell you what is going to happen, because I don't know, and it's not to tell you what I think you should do, because I can't tell you that. And that's certainly up to you. But what I do want to remind you is that part of, I think, being a holistic investor, being a thoughtful, deliberate investor, is focusing on different scenarios, thinking about alternative outcomes, right? We often fall into a particular narrative. I think this is going to happen, and then you sort of put all your chips on that one thing happening. But the future rarely looks exactly how we envision in life, and it certainly doesn't do that in the markets. Occasionally, sometimes by pure luck or accident, it might actually play out exactly how we envision, but usually not. And so a lot of investing, I find, is cutting losses and letting winners run and trying to make sense of things. What I found helpful over my career and learning from some really capable investors is thinking about some different scenarios. What would happen if Bitcoin goes to 65,000? What would happen if Bitcoin goes down to 24,000? What would the market look like? What would the chart, how would it evolve? What signals might I see that would confirm to me that is the probable next step? And by thinking of those scenarios, you're opening yourself up to other opportunities. You're breaking yourself out of that narrative, whatever that narrative is that you've worked up in your head. This forces you to think about some alternative outcomes and alternate scenarios. So I hope that exercise, you found value in that. But just for fun, which of those do I think is most probable and why? Well, let me start off just by showing you my general sense of the chart of Bitcoin. This is a very plain vanilla chart of Bitcoin, and I will show you very quickly with some arrows how I see this as having evolved here. And I'm just going to make some big chunky lines just to make it very simple. I see this chart right now in 4 phases. Phase number 1 was sort of the ultra bullish phase, going from Bitcoin 10,000 up to Bitcoin 64,000. The second phase was going sort of the distribution phase, from a high of 64,000 to the low of 30,000. The third phase is this consolidation phase, which I would argue we're now out of, which is this sideways choppiness. And you can see each of these looks a little different. And now I would argue we're in this fourth phase, which is the beginning of further upside. This is not the end of a move, as far as I can tell so far. It's a trend that's in pretty good shape. Now, Charles Dow, century plus ago, pointed out how we can determine what the trend is, and it's by looking at the highs and the lows. By looking at the peaks and the valleys in the price over time, we can make a simple assessment of whether something's in an uptrend or downtrend. So the way that I determined that we had transitioned from an accumulation phase to a distribution phase was right about here, right? It's very hard to tell at the moment, even though looking back, it would be awesome to know at the day of the highest close that was the moment you probably decided that things were topping out. More often than not, as a trend follower, I'm a little bit late to the top, and that's okay, because the goal is to make money on the bulk of the trend, on the bulk of the move. So the lower low here in April that undercut the March low is one tell. The lower high in May was especially important, and when we break down there, that tells you we're really in distribution mode. You can see the sideways trend where we came down to the Fibonacci line. We don't have it illustrated on this chart. It will be on the next chart, but we got back down to that same level right around 30,000. That lined up really well with the January low. That sort of told us we're at a logical support level, and now we've been range bound. But now a lot of things have changed. You can see instead of being in a consolidation mode, we're now making higher highs and higher lows especially. So I see that transition from different phases as being pretty clear on the Bitcoin chart. And I would argue the last month has rotated Bitcoin to more of an accumulation phase. So out of those 4 scenarios, what do I find is most probable? It's scenario number 2, which is basically that we would sort of rotate between 42,000 and 52 to 54,000. We don't make it quite up to the previous highs, but we stay in this elevated range for a little while. And here's why I think that's the most probable scenario. And again, even though all 4 of them are absolutely possible. The fact that the transition has occurred, I think, is key. I think breaking above 42,000 was a key indication. We saw 42,000 here. This is actually the same level as the January 2021 peak. We came right back up to that level, and instead of retesting the lows, we made a higher low right about here, and then you can see we rotated back to the upside. So I think that was an important reversion back to the upside. I think breaking above the 200-day moving average, breaking above that Fibonacci resistance level around 44,000 is really key. So as long as we remain above this pink shaded area, which is in the 42 to 44,000 range, I think this thesis is pretty stable. Why do I not see we're going to go back up to the all-time highs? We certainly could, but the way I'm seeing it is because of the distribution that we've had. I don't know if I could see it just turning and accelerating back to the upside. I'm seeing plenty of movement. I'm expecting plenty of volatility, and I don't think we've worked through all the uncertainty on the chart of Bitcoin just yet. So I could see drawdowns, and I could see us rotating around before setting the stage to go to that next move higher. Why do I not see the third one as the most probable? And it's simply because we've broken out of the range. That range is in place until it's not. And one of the classic premises of technical analysis is once you establish a range, you look to see which way it breaks and you follow the direction of that momentum. I think the range has been broken to the upside. I think that's overall an inherently bullish indication. Same reason, why do I not expect the ultra bearish scenario? Only because 30,000 has held so consistently. And because we've already gotten up to the 47, 48,000 range, we'd have to come back quite a bit. And I think by the time we get there, I think the same people that would be interested in buying in these previous cycles would certainly be interested in buying one more time and bringing it in at those levels. Now, again, to be clear, I think the second scenario is most probable based on my technical assessment, and again, based on the breakout and just based on what it would take to get it from here all the way to retest the previous highs. Is it possible to go to new all-time highs? Absolutely. Is it possible to go back and break below 42,000? Of course it is. Is it possible to go to 22,000? All of those things are possible. The exercise here is to think about what's probable and also to think about what's possible and think about what the chart might look like. So let's talk about what would tell us that scenario number 2 is incorrect. For me, it would be a break below 42,000. I think my thesis, option number 2, makes sense as long as we remain above 42K. If we would break below that, I would have to completely revisit it, because what that tells you is this is not a sustained breakout. There's not enough sustained buying power to keep it above that important support level. So as long as we remain above that pink shaded area, I'll feel pretty confident that scenario 2 is a pretty good call. But if we would break 42,000, that would be the line in the sand, at which point I agree I would need to reevaluate it and pay attention to it. I think that's it. So those are the 4 scenarios. That's how I think of the phases in Bitcoin. I think for me, the key with using Fibonacci support and resistance levels and just traditional price support and resistance levels is defining clear levels, lines in the sand, as I would call them, at which you determine you're going to reevaluate. I think we have a clear breakout and a clear line in the sand at 42,000, and that's what I would use at this point for Bitcoin. So there you have it. Did you agree with my assessment that option 2 out of those 4 is the most probable? And if not, what do you disagree with? Why do you think 1, 3, or 4 is the better outcome? Again, I hope you watched that first video first, talking about the 4 scenarios and how that might play out. This video is meant to come after that to describe my take on it and how I think of the evolution of Bitcoin. What would tell me that my approach, option number 2, is incorrect? And I think the goal of this is to teach the logic, or teach the benefit of thinking of alternative scenarios. I think it's a really good way to break out of the narratives that you might have created on your own or might have heard elsewhere. It helps you to think critically about your investment thesis, and I found it to be incredibly valuable to help question my positioning and question my outlook. If this sort of thinking about investor decision making and in technical analysis, behavioral finance, trend, momentum, all of that and above is of interest to you, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. It'd be great to have you along this ride. Also, give the video a thumbs up if you appreciated it. We would very much appreciate that back. Finally, put a comment below the video. Do you agree with my thesis on option number 2? And if not, why? For everyone at Market Misbehavior, I'm Dave Keller. Be well, stay safe. Talk to you again soon.